pause for a moment. Look at these 5 chairs in front of you. Don't analyze them. Don't judge their comfort or practicality. Just let your eyes rest on one. Which chair pulls at something deep inside you? Which one speaks to a part of yourself you rarely acknowledge? This isn't just about furniture. This is about uncovering the hidden architecture of your psyche. Because what draws you in, what captures your attention in that split second before your rational mind takes over, that reveals more about your inner world than you might imagine. Before we dive deeper into what your choice means, take a second right now and comment which chair caught your eye. Just type the number or describe it briefly, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why that particular chair called to you. And if you're ready to explore the hidden chambers of your unconscious mind, hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to helping you understand the profound wisdom that lives beneath the surface of your everyday choices. Now, I'm going to reveal what each chair says about your deepest psychological patterns. But here's what most people don't realize until the very end. One of these chairs reveals a shadow you've been running from your entire life. We'll get to that, but first, let's start with the chair that seems the most innocent, the most simple. Look at this chair. Plain, unadorned, almost invisible in its simplicity. There's no drama here, no bold statement, just clean lines, neutral tones, and an almost meditative quietness. If this chair caught your attention, something in your unconscious is crying out for peace. Your mind craves clarity in a world drowning in noise. You're exhausted by the constant demands, the emotional turbulence, the chaos that never seems to end. This chair represents your desire to strip away everything unnecessary and finally breathe. But let's go deeper. Because the unconscious never shows us just what we want, it also reveals what we fear. The minimalist chair embodies what depth psychology calls the hermit archetype. Not the hermit who retreats because they hate the world, but the one who withdraws because their inner world feels more real, more sacred than the superficial connections outside. You value silence not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned that most words are empty. Think back to your childhood. Was your home filled with emotional chaos? Did you grow up in an environment where feelings exploded without warning, where you never knew what mood would greet you when you walked through the door? Many people who choose the minimalist chair learned early that simplicity equals safety. If you keep things small, controlled, manageable, then nothing can hurt you. This chair is your emotional armor. Not rigid, cold armor, but something softer. A gentle boundary that whispers to the world, I'm here, but not completely. I'm close, but not too close. You've mastered the art of being present without being vulnerable. But here's the shadow side, the part your unconscious might be hiding from you. What if your need for simplicity isn't just preference? What if it's avoidance? What if you've created such a calm, controlled exterior that you've lost touch with the full spectrum of your emotional life? The hermit sees what others miss. They notice the subtle shifts in energy, the unspoken feelings, the beauty in small moments. But the hermit can also become so guarded that intimacy becomes impossible. You might find yourself in relationships where you're always slightly removed, always holding something back, always ready to retreat into your inner sanctuary. Is silence your refuge or your cage? That's the question this chair is asking you. Because psychodiplomacy teaches us that what we repress doesn't disappear, it simply goes underground, shaping our lives from the shadows. Your desire for peace might be masking a fear of emotional intensity, a terror of losing control, a deep-seated belief that if you feel too much, you'll shatter. But before we move on, let me tell you something crucial. One of these 5 chairs represents not just a personality type, but an actual psychological wound that's been directing your life choices without your awareness. We're getting closer to revealing which one. But first, let's explore the second chair. This chair tells stories. When you look at it, you can almost feel the weight of history in its wood, the craftsmanship passed down through generations. It's refined without being pretentious, solid, grounded, timeless. If this chair drew your attention, your psyche is searching for structure in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and meaningless. You need frameworks, principles, something solid to stand on. You're not someone who chases trends or gets swept up in whatever's new and shiny. You value depth, substance, and legacy. This choice aligns with what we call the guardian archetype. The guardian doesn't just protect people, they protect values, traditions, and the accumulated wisdom of those who came before. There's a deep sense of responsibility in you, a feeling that you're here to preserve something important, even if you can't always name what that something is. You probably have strong principles that guide your decisions. You might not talk about them constantly, but they're there, like an internal compass pointing you toward what feels right and true. You're uncomfortable with vagueness, with people who constantly shift their positions, with situations where the rules keep changing. But let's examine the shadow, because every archetype casts darkness alongside its light. Behind your love of structure might hide a fear of chaos, particularly internal chaos. What would happen if you stopped following the script? If you let go of the rules just for a moment and allowed yourself to simply feel, without judgment, without needing everything to make sense? The classic chair often calls to people who experienced either too much structure or not enough in their formative years. Maybe you grew up in a home with rigid rules but little warmth, where you learned that following protocol was safer than expressing authentic emotion. Or perhaps your childhood was so unstable, so unpredictable, that you're now building the framework you desperately needed back then. You might be someone who holds everything together, even when it's falling apart inside. You maintain the appearance of grace, of having it all figured out, because showing vulnerability feels like failure. The world sees your composure, but who sees the effort it takes to maintain it? Here's what depth psychology reveals. Your attachment to tradition, to order, to classical beauty isn't weakness, but it becomes limiting when your structure stops supporting you and starts confining you, when your rules become a prison instead of a foundation. Do your principles allow you to grow, or do they keep you locked in patterns that no longer serve you? And here's something even more unsettling. The chair you chose reveals not just who you are, but who you're afraid of becoming. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about the third chair might shake something loose in your understanding of yourself. We're halfway through this psychological journey, and if you're starting to see yourself more clearly, that's exactly what this channel is designed to do. We explore the hidden dimensions of the psyche, the unconscious patterns that shape your reality. Subscribe now so you don't miss the deeper explorations we do every week. And hit that notification bell, because some of these insights are going to challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. Now look at this chair. Soft curves, plush fabric, an invitation to sink in and finally rest. This isn't just a place to sit, it's a sanctuary, a refuge, a space where you can let your guard down and simply exist without pressure or performance. If this chair called to you, your unconscious is revealing a deep need to be seen, to be valued, to have your presence acknowledged and respected. You're tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. You've been holding up the world for too long, and you're searching for a place where you can finally set it down. This chair resonates with the sovereign archetype, but not in the way most people think. The sovereign isn't about dominance or control. It's about dignity, about claiming your right to exist fully, about building an inner throne where you finally feel worthy of rest. But the path to that inner sovereignty often runs through an old wound, the wound of invisibility, of being overlooked, of learning that your needs only mattered when they served someone else's agenda. Think back. Were you the child who learned to be useful to earn love? Did you discover early that your value was conditional, that you had to perform, achieve, or caretaker to deserve attention? Many people drawn to the cozy chair are unconsciously trying to build the safe haven they never had. This isn't selfishness, it's survival. It's your psyche saying, "I've carried enough. I deserve comfort. I deserve to be held," instead of always holding everyone else. But here's the shadow pattern. Sometimes the cozy chair becomes a fortress of isolation. You create such a perfect, controlled environment that genuine intimacy can't penetrate. You might surround yourself with symbols of comfort and status, not because you're materialistic, but because these things serve as proof that you matter, that you've made it, that you're finally safe. The question is, are you truly comfortable? Or are you compensating for a deep sense of insufficiency? Depth psychology teaches us that our shadow appears in what we overemphasize. If you constantly need to prove your worth through external markers of success or comfort, it's worth asking what internal emptiness you're trying to fill. Can you feel worthy without the throne? Can you accept yourself when you're not in control, when you're vulnerable, when you're simply human and flawed? Because the true self isn't revealed through power or comfort. It emerges when we're brave enough to be seen in our entirety, including the parts that aren't impressive or put together. Now, I promised I'd reveal which chair represents an actual psychological wound that's been directing your life. We're almost there. But first, you need to understand the fourth chair, because this one reveals something about creative expression that most people completely misunderstand. This chair demands attention. Bold colors, unique design, unconventional materials. It refuses to fade into the background or blend with the crowd. It's a declaration. I exist. I'm alive. I'm different. And I'm not apologizing for it. If this chair caught your eye, there's a wild, untamed energy in you that refuses to be boxed in by social expectations or conventional thinking.
You see the world differently, more vividly, more deeply. Life isn't just something to survive, it's something to experience, to feel, to transform into art or meaning or beauty. This aligns with what depth psychology calls the eternal child archetype. Not childish, but childlike, still connected to wonder, to spontaneity, to the raw creative force that most adults have suppressed into submission. You probably resist routine, feel suffocated by rigid schedules, and hunger for experiences that make you feel truly alive. But let's go beneath the surface, because sometimes the brightest colors hide the deepest pain. Your creativity, your expressiveness, your refusal to conform, these might not just be personality traits, they might be survival mechanisms. Perhaps you learned early that being authentic was dangerous, that showing your true self led to rejection or ridicule. Maybe you were told you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too different. So you made a choice, perhaps unconsciously. If the world won't accept the real me, then I'll create my own world. A world of color and meaning and beauty where I make the rules. The expressive chair often calls to wounded souls who've been judged for their authenticity. Your creativity isn't just self-expression, it's medicine. It's how you process pain, how you make sense of a world that's tried to diminish you, how you prove to yourself that you still exist despite everything that's tried to erase you.
But here's the shadow question. Is your freedom genuine, or is it reactive? Are you being yourself, or are you performing a version of rebellion? Do you create from a place of self-love, or from a desperate need to be seen? Depth psychology reminds us that true individuation, true wholeness, requires integrating all aspects of yourself, not just the colorful, expressive parts, also the quiet parts, the sad parts, the confused parts, the parts that don't know what to create or how to shine. Can you be yourself even in silence? Can you accept yourself when you're not performing, when there's no audience, when you're just ordinary and human? If these insights are resonating with you, if you're starting to see patterns in your life that you've never noticed before, leave a comment sharing which chair you chose and whether this analysis surprised you. This community is built on deep exploration and honest reflection. And make sure you're subscribed because we're about to reveal the final chair, the one that represents the deepest psychological wound. Look at this final chair. Harsh angles, industrial materials, no softness or invitation. It's built like a fortress, designed for endurance, not comfort. Metal and wood, cold and unyielding. This chair doesn't want to charm you, it wants to outlast you. If this is your chair, your psyche is speaking about survival in its rawest form. You've learned to build walls, not because you're cold, but because you've been hurt too many times. Trust isn't something you give easily. Your emotional world isn't an open field. It's a citadel, and the gates are locked for good reason. This aligns with the warrior archetype, but also with the wounded warrior. Look at this final chair. Harsh angles, industrial materials, no softness or invitation. It's built like a fortress, designed for endurance, not comfort. Metal and wood, cold and unyielding. This chair doesn't want to charm you, it wants to outlast you. If this is your chair, your psyche is speaking about survival in its rawest form. You've learned to build walls, not because you're cold, but because you've been hurt too many times. Trust isn't something you give easily. Your emotional world isn't an open field, it's a citadel, and the gates are locked for good reason. This aligns with the warrior archetype, but also with the wounded warrior, the one who fights not for glory, but simply to keep standing. You carry your pain in silence because you learned early that showing vulnerability is dangerous. Maybe people used your emotions against you. Maybe your trust was betrayed so thoroughly that you decided never to be that exposed again. The resistant chair is a declaration. I will endure. I don't need comfort or validation. I just need to survive. But here's what your unconscious might be hiding from you. Your toughness, your self-reliance, your refusal to need anyone. These aren't just strength, they're also loneliness. Behind your armor is someone who desperately wants connection, but is terrified of the risk it requires. You push people away, even while part of you aches to let them in. You create distance in relationships before they can get close enough to hurt you. You've become so good at protecting yourself that you've forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to ask for help, how to admit that you're tired of fighting alone. Now, here's what I promised to reveal. Every single one of these chairs represents a wound. But the resistant chair represents the wound that's easiest to ignore, the one that feels like strength but is actually a prison. The minimalist chair's wound is fear of intensity. The classic chair's wound is fear of chaos. The cozy chair's wound is fear of worthlessness. The expressive chair's wound is fear of invisibility. But the resistant chair's wound is the most dangerous because it masquerades as independence. Your wound is the fear of connection itself. And until you acknowledge that this toughness is costing you intimacy, authenticity, and the possibility of being truly known, you'll remain locked in a fortress of your own making. None of these choices are wrong. Each chair represents a different path, a different survival strategy, a different way your psyche has learned to navigate a complex world. But awareness is the beginning of transformation. By understanding why a particular chair called to you, you've taken the first step toward integrating your shadow, toward becoming conscious of patterns that have been directing your life from beneath the surface. This is the work of depth psychology, not to judge, but to illuminate, not to fix, but to understand. The chair you chose is speaking to you. It's showing you something about your desires, your fears, your unmet needs. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? If this journey into your unconscious has opened something in you, if you want to continue exploring the hidden architecture of your psyche, subscribe to this channel. We go deeper every week into the wisdom that lives beneath your everyday awareness, and share this video with someone who's ready to look beneath the surface of their own choices. Because until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Which chair did you choose? And more importantly, are you ready to understand what it's been trying to tell you?